Hello everybody, welcome to the first episode of The Average Craftsman. My name is Tim Tuttle, and today we're going to build this combination outfeed and assembly table. That's enough chit chat, let's get to work.
Started out by cutting all of the frame and leg parts to length the miter saw. The frame is made up of 2x4s and the legs are made up of 2x6s. To make the legs 5.5 inches square, I took 4 of the leg parts of the table saw to rip off 1.5 inches. Once everything was cut to size, I started assembling the frames. The top and bottom frames are identical, and I used simple butt joints and fastened everything with 3-inch screws. I'm really looking forward to completing this project so I no longer have to use my table saw extension as an assembly table. Once the perimeter of the frames was complete, I moved them to the floor, and it was much easier to attach the interior parts of the frame. With the frames complete, I was able to start putting the legs together. Like the frame, these are just simple butt joints with 3-inch deck screws. Now that the legs and frames are assembled, I could put them all together to make the base of the table. I fastened everything together with a whole bunch of 3-inch deck screws. Once I got the legs attached to one of the frames, it was a little tricky to get the other frame positioned exactly where I wanted it. So I used this clamping trick I learned from one of Jay Bates' videos, and it was a breeze. I now have a fully assembled base. Huzzah! It is all but guaranteed that on every project I make a boneheaded mistake. So here's what happened on this one. When I was doing the initial design of the table, I made a mistake in my notes when measuring my table saw height, and I was off by 1.5 inches. These scrap pieces of 2x6 came in handy and easily fixed my mistake. It was now time to attach the levelers. I lined up the bottom of the levelers flush with the bottom of the legs and secured them with some 3/4 inch screws. I really like these levelers. Adjustment is so simple with just a flat screwdriver. I have a link to these and all the other products and materials I used for this project in the description down below. Like many of us, I have a small shop and I need to keep things mobile, so I bought some Rockler workbench casters. These casters have a lifting mechanism so the table will rest on the levelers while it's stationary and then ride on the casters when I need to move the table. They're extremely handy. It is now time to make the top, which is made up of 2 pieces, a large main section and a smaller extension that can fold down in the event I need to minimize the table's footprint. Each of these pieces is made up of 2 layers of 3/4 inch MDF and then a 1/8 inch thick layer of hardboard, which can be changed out when it gets too beat up. I first used my circular saw to break down the MDF into more manageable sizes, and then took those to the table saw to bring them to their final dimensions. I left one layer oversized about a ½ an inch so I could go back and use my router's flush trim bit to get a consistent edge. A lot of glue, some brad nails, and pretty much every clamp I own and some various heavy objects from around the shop were used to laminate these two layers together. Once the glue was dry, it was time to flush up those edges. This was by far the worst part of this project. It was the first time I had done this much routing on MDF, and I sure wish I would have done it outside. It makes a giant mess. Every single surface of the shop, including myself, was covered with MDF dust. Cleanup was not fun. After flushing up those edges, I hit them with a little bit of sandpaper. As I mentioned before, the top has an extension that can fold down, and I used a piano hinge to connect the main part of the tabletop to the extension. You can see by the gap here that I attempted to install this hinge between the two pieces of the top, and then realized alignment would be a lot easier if I just surface mounted it to the bottom. These hinges come with 1/2 or 3/4 inch screws, and MDF doesn't really hold screws all that well, and since this was going to be out of sight, I just decided to use 1¼ drywall screws. After connecting the two pieces at the top with the hinge, I was able to secure it to the base with 3-inch deck screws. To hold the extension in its extended position, I built some support assemblies out of maple. These smaller pieces are the brackets that attach to the base and to the extension. Upon reflection, I should have cut these so the grain was oriented in the other direction, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. Once all of the brackets were cut, I took them to the bandsaw to angle the corners a bit, and then used the disc sander to remove any of the bandsaw marks. Each bracket got a 3/8 inch hole in the middle to accept a bolt that will hold the support arms, and I drilled and countersunk 2 pilot holes in each bracket where they will attach to the base and the extension. This step would have been much easier had I flipped the pieces over and drilled through the flat end. I'm not sure why that did not dawn on me as I was doing this, but you know, lesson learned. It was then back to the table saw to cut out the support arms from that same maple. I couldn't find my compass, but it just so happens that a cap from Watgo Danish Oil has a diameter of 1 5/8 inches. I rounded the ends of the supports on the bandsaw and used the disc sander to smooth them out. I really hope you like this shot of my sweaty arm. These two got a 3/8 inch hole on each end. With all the parts cut and drilled, I was able to put together each support assembly. I positioned the assemblies and attached them to the legs first and then to the extension. Back to that grain direction issue I mentioned earlier. The way I cut these out meant I was driving these screws into end grain, and it made the brackets fairly brittle in spots. I actually ended up breaking a couple of them while I was attaching them to the base. I attached the hardboard top to the MDF with some 3/4 inch screws, while being mindful not to put screws where I planned on routing out the channels for my miter bars. When the hardboard was secure, I used the router to flush everything up. I then cut out some maple to be used as trim. Once those were cut out, it was back to the drill press where I countersunk some deep pilot holes. A couple of clamps and some cauls held the trim in place, and I was able to secure it with some glue and screws. Some walnut dowels were used to cover the screw holes and provide a little bit of contrast. I then used my flush trim saw to cut them to their final size. I then used my router to add a chamfer to break the corners of the pieces of trim. A scrap piece of 1/2 inch MDO made for a good bottom shelf. I used a router with a straight bit and a couple of straight edges to cut the channels for the miter bars. Again, insanely dirty, insanely dusty, tons of MDF dust all over the place. I should have done this outside. You'd think I would have learned from the first time. A little bit of sanding and she was all done.
Alright, that's a wrap on this project. Final dimensions of the table: 67 1/4 wide, 49 1/2 deep, and 34 7/8 inch tall, give or take an inch or so with the adjustable feet and whatever height your saw is. The swing down leaf on this, not necessary. I did it mainly just to do it. The secondary reason is I got a small shop, obviously just 2-car garage, so moving stuff, I move stuff around all the time. Getting an extra foot out of the table, more space in the garage is always handy. But since I've been using it, I've kind of left it where it is right now. So I'm not really sure how much use I'm going to get out of that. I plan on doing some additions to the table in the future. I'll probably put some base cabinets down below. Right now I have, I'm just using the bottom shelf for storage. I have my 2 sanders and a box of junk. But right now it's doing great at what I built it for. It gives you a nice big surface to put to assemble things on, and it works great as an outfeed table. Below the video in the description you will find a link to the plans on my website, as well as a list of all of the tools and materials that I use to assemble the table. If this is your first time here, and judging by my subscriber count, it is, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe. I plan on doing a lot more projects, and I hope you tune in. Thanks.